the former chaplain at Middlesex Hospital, and I've run grief groups for many years. Started in chaplaincy about 21 years ago. It was in 1998, and that was down at St. Raphael's, when it was St. Raphael's. And then went out to St. Vincent's, and when it was St. Vincent's in Bridgeport. Because one got bought up by Yale, one got snapped by Middlesex, not Middlesex, Hartford Hospital, the hospital's fine. And then I came up to Middlesex. Since 2007, I'm here. And I'm still there as a per diem chaplain. And my own journey through grief is that when I was in 1990, I was 39 really, on New Year's Day of 1990. I had 2 children, and my youngest daughter, 4-year-old daughter, was killed in an accident. And that began my obvious exploration into grief. 3 months after that, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And then 3 years after that, or almost 3 years after that, she died in December 1993. So we were 43 years old, so it was a very, really a turning point in my life and in this whole journey that I've been on since then. So there are just a few slides we're going to use here, but these slides really are great catalysts for what happens to us when we're in grief. And they're not complete, because everybody's grief is different. So the words they're going to use here in the journey of grief may not be the same words that you would use, or what you have experienced in grief. But these will help trigger it. Because one of the problems with grief is that it's hard to find words at all. It's such an experiential and all-encompassing experience that it's really hard to find a word that describes it. And not only that, it changes, it moves with time in different situations. And this looks like it goes in order. And many of you may know the Kubler-Ross. She began the order of grief. She had this whole journey of grief and to acceptance. But it's never this neat and clean. You can go out and then you can go back and then do another thing and then come back. I still can get triggered. This is 30 years later with my own grief in this. So it's never totally gone. So it becomes part of who you are. And as we move through it, though, the healthiest way to move through it is to continue to talk about it and to be with other people who have been in or are in grief. Because people outside of grief, who haven't had it yet or maybe haven't been touched deeply by it, they're sympathetic with us, they're compassionate with us, but they don't know what to do with us, or how to, they don't quite relate to it. As someone else in grief really does know. I'm sorry, should I be standing up? Is it better for you?
I just wanted to make sure we have enough sound there. Right?
Okay.
That's good.
Is it okay? Would you like this?
Yeah.
Okay? Okay,
Yeah,
great,
that's
great.
good, yeah.
I feel a little bit closer with everybody if I'm talking with you.
No, that's fine.
Is that
It's
okay?
fine. The microphone moving is perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nancy. So it's finding then other people who are in it with you or have been there and know just exactly what you're saying. After my 2 losses, because it's all kind of one giant loss, it all happened so quickly before just the terrible loss of my daughter, and then once someone starts to get sick, even what they call anticipated grief, you know this is not going to end well, and you know it's going to be a journey with them. So you just are in it right from beginning to end. And so in saying that, it's good to talk with other people then who have some experience with it. A lot of people tell me, you're so strong, all you're going through. I just can't believe you're able to do this kind of thing. And I'm not feeling the least bit strong. I'm totally lost and confused. And I was the principal of a high school during this. So it's nice of people to say that, but I know that they were not really connecting with it, And the people that I was able to connect with are people that come up and say, you know, there are no words for this, just come and sit with me. You know, that's what we do. So in the tracing of the journey, the first thing always is shock. The loss is the moment, and even though you know it's coming with people who have been ill for a long time, when it happens, it's still a shock. And there's no undoing it, there's no going back. It is, this finality of it is really difficult. There's two different types of grief. One is kind of the natural grief, the normal grief we all go through at some point or another. We're losing our parents, or losing grandparents, and sometimes even spouses as we get older and so on. But there's the other is, and that is what they call complicated grief. And complicated grief is like the loss of my daughter, when it comes suddenly, without any warning, without any expectation, completely out of sync with the life process. When your children die before you do, that sort of thing is, it's not the way it should be kind of thing. That kind of loss is complicated grief. When it's done through violence, there are groups in Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport where it is just for people who've died by gun violence or knife violence or gang violence. Another form of complicated grief. There are those who then died by suicide. Suicide, another form of grief. And although it's still in the vocabulary, we talk about people committing suicide, they talk about it as died by suicide. So it is a way of dying. It's like died from cancer, died from suicide. Because the idea of committing suicide sounds so deliberate and intentional, and so a choice, sounds like a choice, someone made a choice. And we know enough about people in that very dark place that there's often not a choice at all. But so that's the kind of, those are the other forms of grief, this complicated grief. Now, the first level here then is protest. The first reaction always is, that cannot be true. That is no way that happened. I don't want to hear that. I'm not listening to you. And that's part of that shock and part of the numbness. People often can't even remember where they were or who told them or how they, because it's so numbing to go through it that you're numb and you are stopped feeling, you stop processing information, you just can't take it in. And often that's when you see people start to faint or they need to be supported and so on because they've just gone offline. And then the confusion. There's a lot of confusion. Once you've lost somebody close to you, the planet has changed. Your life has changed. And the closer the person is, in terms of your identity, the more impacting is that sense of loss. So if it is someone who you lived with, and you saw every day, and that you've known so well, they're no longer here, that's huge in terms of your identity. We don't even realize until our partner is gone, or the people around us, so my oldest son, or my mother, or my father, how close you were to them, that how much your identity depended on them. And when they're not there, the first question is, who am I now? Who am I now? Who would ever know me again like that? Who will ever even appreciate me or have the insight into me, or who's going to make me feel alive again? And that has a lot to do with our self-identity, and that's part of this journey. Because if you're not, in some ways, you're not the same self. And then out of that also, of course, when we are hurting, anger comes into it, guilt always comes into it. We learned a lot about guilt from during World War II with the Holocaust and people and survivors of the camps in Auschwitz. So on, the guilt they carried, survivor's guilt they call that, but there's always guilt. And the things that you tend to remember because you're in a negative space are the negative things that happened. What I said, what I should never have spoken about, if I had only, but no way you could possibly have known those things. This is very difficult for parents and adolescents, for example. As parents, any of you have had adolescents, You always have fights with your adolescent. It's part of being an adolescent. They're a pain in the neck, and it's very rare that it's a smooth ride. But should that adolescent die in a car accident or whatever in the midst of their adolescence, you feel incredible guilt for it because that's the thing you remember most. Because that's really how you interacted. Now, if the person had survived and succeeded and got a PhD from Harvard, said, wasn't I a great mom? Wasn't I a great dad or great older brother or whatever? It would have been a totally different story. But because of the story that we were in when it happened, it affects our memory of the relationship. And we tend to remember the negative more over the positive. We're looking for, how did I play into this? How did I go wrong? I shouldn't have, or I should have. And then the last thing in that protest aisle there is physical symptoms. You feel like you are thrown off the back of a truck. Everything, even physically hurts. You just feel sore everywhere. I was very sore for a long time during both of my losses. I remember that. A lot of people can't eat anymore, or they feel they can't sleep, so they're up all night with anxiety or with indigestion. And some people, of course, turn to more alcohol or drugs, and that aggravates also the physical symptoms of it. And there's no way, as we all know now, and there have been a lot of studies done, there's no way around grief. You can't numb yourself with alcohol or drugs. When you sober up, when you finally come back, it's still there, and you've got to still go through grief. So a lot more knowledge now is done with that. Back in the day, from the guys come back from World War II, when they thought about shell shock and so on, they didn't have PTSD words for that kind of thing. It was always, and the doctor would say, sorry, Joe, but I got some bad news for you. You pick up a bottle of scotch and say, in the doctor's office here, have a shot of bourbon or whatever, Not helpful, really. It does not help in the long run. You really need to have to go through it. So once you get through all those protest stages, and you may have more in your own experience than what's here, of that no, that the searching starts to go, and that's the restlessness. And what are my belief systems? Where am I'm preoccupied with this, with that life, with my life now, with what's happening. Family dissonance. Because we all grieve differently, one person in a family dies, 3 siblings all react differently to it. And they often start going at each other, or the surviving parent with the other kids, and so on. And there's sometimes underlying, I loved him more than you did, he loved me more than you did, she really cared more about me than you, and that stuff begins to come up. And so there's a lot of family dissonance. For example, in one of the groups I was in, there were 2 sisters who got along beautifully with their mom. But came time, they had to bring her to a nursing home with a hospice in it. And they brought her there together. They searched for places. They found the right place for her. And all the way back in the car, the 2 of them fought like hell. They had never had a bad word between them. They just turned on each other horribly all the way back. And the reason for that is that they were both in grief. And grief, family dissonance begins. Everything starts to come apart. You'll hear of families where, kind of the mother always held the family together kind of thing, the siblings and the aunts and uncles and the in-laws, and she's kind of the matriarch. And when she passes, everybody starts fighting. They don't talk to each other anymore. Families break up. Very common scenario is really grief. That's unresolved grief in a family. And that's where that dissonance comes from. It's not that she was a ruling matriarch or the guy was a patriarch and ran everything. It's just that the grief has come up and nobody knows what to do with this, particularly with each other. Because we all remind each other, if we're in the same family, of the person who is no longer there. The empty chair at the Thanksgiving dinner or the Christmas or whatever it is dinner. It's screaming. And we suddenly are in discomfort with one another. So, and then the other part there, the searching is there's a real sense of lowered self-esteem. I seem to have been so competent before, I could do anything, you know, now I don't feel I can, I don't have any energy for it. My memory is shot, I can't remember a bloody thing afterwards, you know, that people are talking to me and I have no idea what they're saying. Your self-confidence is really trashed very quickly when we're in grief. And again, it will come back. You don't have Alzheimer's, all the things we start to think about. It really is a reaction to the loss. And we just have not yet been able to process it. So those things are to be expected. And that's why it's good to have this list. It's good to have this map. Because somebody, several times, not just once, several times will come to grief group and they would see me afterwards, actually come to the grief presentation, and come to see me afterwards and just to say, you know, I think I'm doing okay, but I just came to find out if I'm going crazy or not. Because you don't know, is what I'm going through normal? I'm really not myself, and I'm not in a good place. And then once I can see the words for it, and so I'm like, oh, it's part of grief that this is coming from. People come in sometimes, and you know, if it's very common when the husband dies, and the husband was the one who always cut the lawn or whatever. She never learned how to do a lawnmower because he always did it. So she goes out and she's swearing at them and kicking the thing because it's where the hell is he? If he was here, I'd kill him myself. He left me with this place, and that kind of thing comes up. The anger comes up. The self-confidence is awful, and people just break down in tears. Just melt. They just feel totally inept, and that's all part of that period of time when we're trying to recreate, reinvent, get on without that other person there some way. And it's very, very hard. The last thing here, the lowest point here, not the last thing, but the lowest point here is despair. And it's when it's absolute agony, you know, the anguish is awful. It can lead to depression, to loneliness, to a sense of meaninglessness in life, become completely apathetic, and you've just lost any interest in anything. Nothing is any interest. No movies, TV, no food, nothing. No holidays. Holidays are ruined, kind of thing. It's a very, very dark place to be in. And that place you want to minimize as little as possible. But to be aware that if you have a history of depression or of anxiety, this is only going to make it worse, or potentially it's going to make it worse. So for that stage or that experience, it is fine to get to a therapist. It is fine to get on medications to get through that. You don't want to add this onto what's already kind of a preset disposition that you have been dealing with in your life. Because this just adds that more pressure to it, and depression can get deeper. I remember the old TV commercials. Was it Mike Wallace, whoever you know, remember said, you know, if you've got depression, don't wait for it, get help. And that's true. That's when it's time to get help. So, and it's a funny line here. We don't want to pathologize depression. Depression is not I don't mean depression, I mean grief. Grief is not a diagnosis. Grief is not it's not like depression or like anxiety disorders. It's not a disorder. It is an experience that we all go through in life. And so it's never over, and as over, it's always there, but it changes, and the quality of it changes. And so it becomes a little bit more doable, it becomes a little bit more self-compassionate, self-care, instead of guilty, angry, furious all the time at yourself. You come out of that negativity into a slightly more, at least neutral relationship with yourself, and then slowly begins to go up into a more positive relationship with yourself, particularly as you take on a new identity. You're not who you were
And I'm assuming there's setbacks too, that you can go to one stage and then have a setback to another. Does that happen early on or later on?
More likely to happen early on than later on, because there's a certain hump you get over where you can get kind of bummed out by things, but you're not going to be devastated by them anymore. I can still get triggered. My grief gets triggered. You know, someone was saying the other day, not even related, knowing nothing about me, and not even related to anything about grief, actually. But we have an expression, you know, I wonder where they hide the bodies. You know, it was something on the news, whatever it was, or actually they were talking about a news thing, of, you know, skeletons in the closet, that kind of thing. But it brought back bodies to me. And death came up. Immediately my daughter came up. I mean, this is like, that was 1990. And a terrible shudder ran through me of that. And I kind of went blank. I lost totally the rest of the conversation. I have no idea where that conversation went. Nobody, thank goodness, seemed to notice, or if they wouldn't have known. They wouldn't even known, actually. But I just knew, wow, it's still always here. It's just always here. You know, and like it can get shaken. But it passed. You know, I shook it off, or it shook me off, and you get back faster. Earlier days when that happened, and it did happen certainly in earlier days, it could set me back for a week, you know, weeks sometimes, back into kind of gloomy, lonely, a little bit anxiety feeling about life again. You know, like when's the next shoe going to drop? Who's next? That kind of feeling. That kind of scary stuff. Once you get over the hump, that does not come back. You're over that. So even that shudder I got the other day there, it's like a reminder, wow, this part of me is still frail. But not gonna totally wipe me out. It's a good question.
That time frame, though, I know it's different for everybody, but sometimes it lasts a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very hard to get over. And anything can trigger it. Anything.
That's right.
Like I was going over to a friend's house, and I happened to pass over in Portland, a hot dog lady. And I just sat there and said, oh, Robin, I used to do that, go there all the time with him. And it was like, it was a happy thing, and then all of a sudden, boom. I said, oh, that's right. And for the rest of that trip, all the way until my friend's house, I was crying the whole time. And it was just like, all right.
Yeah.
That, you know, that just killed that day.
Yeah.
You know, and it took a long time to get over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can hit any time, any place.
How long has it been for you?
He's only been gone 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's...
Yeah. See, now in people's normal lifespan, 2 years like a long time. In grief, 2 years like yesterday. It's like last week. You know? It's like, that's really early grief. I always tell everybody, for at least 3 years, 4 years, I consider that early grief. 5 years, on the 7 years, maybe kind of mid-grief. 10 years out, then maybe we need some extra support. But the first couple of years, 3 years, so 4 years even, it's very raw. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like, you're still, well, for me, sometimes it's still, I'm in denial because, you know, how could he be gone?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we were together for a long time, and we did everything together. We went everywhere together. There was everything, Robin. And then all of a sudden, you know, when he was gone, it was like, how could you? How could you leave? You know, I mean, what? I mean, in his case, he was really sick, and he had no choice in the matter. I mean, he didn't have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
But it was just, and you know, and after he was gone, it was like, okay, you know, how do I go on?
Yeah.
You know, and it's tough. It's hard.
It is.
Because all of a sudden I'm alone completely.
Mm.
I mean, I've got my family and friends, my church, and all that kind of thing. But
Not
when
the
I'm
same.
home,
Yeah.
I'm alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah. Well, in the next couple of slides I'm going to go over, I want to try and give some words and expression to just what you were speaking of. What is your first name again?
Susan.
Susan, yeah. That's what Susan was talking about here. And this is the Bill of Rights of the Bereaved. Because outside society, they say 2 years, haven't you moved on yet? moved on. You get moved on, I had one woman in the group. Her husband had passed away. 3 weeks later, his best friend from work and his wife, they used to hang out sometimes as couples, invited her over for dinner, and he invited a single guy from work to have dinner with them. And she said, I just want to jump right through the picture window at the end of the living room, to try and set somebody up for, with someone else there's just no idea. I mean, they were trying to be nice, and that was 3 weeks. 3 weeks, you should be moving on. 3 weeks? Anyway, so do not make me do anything I do not wish to do. Now, this is a very popular conversation in the group. Often the kids of the family, of the parents, will say, it's time you move. It's time we sell Dad's car because it's not going to need it anymore anyway. Let's clean out the closet. People sometimes leave the stuff, her stuff or his stuff in that closet for years. And it's not time to let go of it yet. And because, can we come over, we'll bring it all down to Goodwill for you, because don't do anything. So that's a good thing. It's like you put it on the fridge for the kids or for the relatives. Don't make me do anything I do not wish to do. And let me cry. Go try and stop you from crying, So, it's going to be okay. So dry up those tears. It's going to be all right. They put their hands on your head. You'll be okay. No, crying is okay. We have to cry. It's just a cryable thing. If there ever was anything to cry about, now is the time to cry. Allow me to talk about the deceased. People frequently talk about it. They come into a family meeting or at the office, and we shh, here she comes, shh. And they change the subject. Hey, listen, so how about the Yankees last night? What do you think about that game? Because, it's okay to talk about it. One woman in one of the groups, her husband was a firefighter. And she would go to the firehouse on Saturday morning, because the guys are all there, they do their cleaning up of the trucks and all that stuff, and sit around just to hear them talk about her husband. She said, and they would say, we're so sorry. She said, no, I'm here because I want to hear about him. When he was here, what was he doing? And I want to hear about this. I want to hear all the stories, And that was really comforting for her. So talk about the deceased is really helpful. Do not force me to make quick decisions. Again, selling the car, selling the house. They tell you after, when you're in grief, do not do anything for at least a year. Don't move for at least a year, because you can't even anticipate where you're going to be a year from now. Oh, thank you. That's good. Is that my better side? Number 5, let me act strange sometimes. It's okay to numb out, to pull over. I mean, one woman was talking about, she's doing her shopping in Stop and Shop, whatever, down the aisle. Comes down, she reaches for the Cheerios, and she just bursts into tears. Because he always ate Cheerios, and that was, she said she had to leave. She left the basket and everything, just got out of the thing, people would start thinking she's strange or weird, walking by her and stuff, and she's just devastated. And Cheerios. So it's okay to numb out, it's okay to stare out the window and just kind of go into that space of numbness or weirdness or whatever's going on, it's fine. To be able to tell people that, right now, a Christmas party, I'm not really in the mood for this year. I always tell people, and I had to do this, never go to a party and get locked in by other cars. Make sure your car is on the street. You get out of there when you need to get out of there. And there's nothing worse than I'm jumping out of my skin. I got to get out of this place. Go out of here. And then you got to go around asking for the people who are blocking you in to please move. And then you got to tell them why. And you just want to go out the back door quietly and don't ruin anybody's party. So it's just good to know that. Let me see that you're grieving too. It's okay to cry in front of me. It's okay to talk about the person. I think that's important at the dinner table or at the Christmas table to bring him up or her up and to say what she would have liked and what was her favorite food and talk about her. Always fine to do. When I'm angry, do not discount it. We can be very short in our grief because we're not in a particularly good mood about the planet right now. And often God and spirituality, in fact, is no help because nothing's coming through. Like, where is my husband? why did he have to leave and so on? So, they say God gets a lot of anger at this time in grief, and it's okay. She can take it. But whatever it is that you're feeling, it's okay. It's okay to be angry, and other people should take that seriously. Oh, have another drink. You'll be fine. No, this is real, this anger. So you want to let your family know that. These are good things. These are really things for other people to know about us. Do not speak to me in platitudes. People start talking to you like they come out of a Hallmark card. Oh, don't worry, God always fits the burden to the back, that kind of thing. It's not really helpful right now. I don't need to have Irish aphorisms for getting through this. Or that saying, you're strong, you're gonna get through this. Or, don't worry, there's someone else. There are a lot of fish in the sea. Telling a woman that as she's lost her husband, that's a horrific thing to say, but people just say weird stuff to you, thinking they're being helpful. But they just don't know. They don't have a clue. Not a clue about it. And you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. So, you have to have a lot of compassion for them. 9, listen to me, please. Because quickly you become kind of the invisible person in the room, and no one's really paying attention to you because you're, somewhere else. And you really want to be listened to. Don't let the people again make decisions for you. And then forgive me my trespasses, my rudeness, and my thoughtlessness. And I believe it's common practice on the year, for example, when you lose your spouse, you don't have to send back Christmas cards that year, for example. It's not being rude, it's just that it's not an expectation of somebody who is in grief that we should have to do those other kind of things. Or thank you notes, or call people, how are you doing this weekend, how are you getting by? That kind of energy that goes out that way. People just have to forgive us and understand, I'm not doing that this year. I'm not calling every week to see how you are or whatever. I really have to take care of myself. And that's important that we do that we allow ourselves to do that. We don't need one more bad thing to beat ourselves up for. So be rude. And I remember an older guy came into the group, and he said, boy, people are so rude, they slam the door in your face. In the old days, you used to wear black armbands, so they knew to be kind around you, to be a little more gentle with you because you were in grief. But there's no sign now of that, so people just treat you like you're nobody. That was his feeling of that. And it's good to know this, good to share this, and this again gives us language and understanding, so you can see yourself here. You can see your relatives here, and it helps understand the journey. Any comment on this slide before I go on to the next one? Okay, we're going to have copies of this too, so that you'll take notes on those to help give us some language to this. The clock's over. Yeah, give them 20. So the 12 freedoms of healing from grief. And you have the freedom to realize your grief is unique. It's not like everybody else's. There are lots of books on grief, and they may be helpful. People often find them helpful. But their grief is not your grief. So you find some things that are helpful, other things not helpful. And even in a grief group. Some will be expressing what you're feeling, someone else expressing that I haven't felt that at all. That's okay. That's their unique experience. You have the freedom to talk about your grief. You mentioned in the previous slide, you have the freedom to expect to feel a multitude of emotions. And one of the things about grief is that emotions come without warning. Suddenly, it washes up over you, as I was saying before there. And then a lot of emotions, not just emotion of loss, but also emotions sometimes of regret. Oh, I should have said that, or I should have done that, or that kind of thing. Certainly emotions of guilt, the most common thing, and this guilt. Shouldn't have yelled at her that time. I should have done this at that time. Should have bought her that time. Or you will forget that she's gone or he's gone. You'll be in the store and say, that's going to look great on her. I'm going to get her that for her birthday, and she's not here anymore. Or I'm going to get that book for him because he would love this book. And you then remember, oh, he's gone. And it's a shock. And when you get to that other side of the valley, and you're coming up out of it, you have those moments where you're feeling so good that day, you haven't felt good in a long time, you forgot that they're not here. And you start thinking again as if they were. So, let me get 2 cups of coffee. I love this kind of roll, bring it home. And what did you say?
You go to call them?
Yeah, I'll go to call maybe? Absolutely, yeah. Oh, let me get that.
Because you're like excited about something or anything and you want to share something?
Yes.
And then you forget.
Yes. Yeah. And he would have gotten that, but no one else on your call list would get that, you know? Yeah. So you can. Number 4, you have the freedom to allow for numbness. And numbness is okay. Numbness is not necessarily falling into depression. It's not necessarily falling into a kind of a pathological state or a psychiatric need state. Numbness is just the time the body is still healing. You know, your life has just been hit by a truck, you know, and it's just this numbing. It's just numbing, and it needs that kind of blank time to just stare, and that's okay. It's okay to do that, not to worry about it, not to start fearing that you're losing it. You may be as a way of healing. You're just going offline for a moment because it's just too much. In number 5, you have the freedom to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. A lot of us I found anyway, I was exhausted by 7 o'clock at night. I was wiped. I mean, and I was young at the time, 43, but I did not have half the energy I had before. And that's often the thing that comes up in the group, this worry that I just don't have the energy to get through this. I'm going to bed at, I'm turning off everything, at 8 o'clock at night, and then up at 3 in the morning, and then back to sleep at 5, and up again at 7, and it's like, it's just so weird. You're totally off kilter. You're totally off your game. And to do something like to have to cut the lawn, have to change a light bulb is like such an annoyance. It's like, I just don't have the energy to do that. I was one of I guess we all have those smoke detectors in our homes now. And when the battery runs out, what it starts to do, it starts to beep, beep. And this little thing has been beeping for like weeks. So the beeping drives me crazy. That's why I was finally do get around to changing the battery. But she just couldn't deal with it. And finally, someone, her son called her and said, "Mom, I hear that beeping in the back still. Is that still going on?" "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you should change that because it'll drive you crazy." And I said, "Well, would you come over for me and change it?" It's okay to ask for help, and other people they don't realize we need help. They think we're doing okay, and they don't want to insult us either by, you need help. So it's okay to ask for help and get people to help you because you just don't have the energy for stuff. And to admit that and to ask for help is great. And the same with the emotional limits, the emotional energy. I just don't have the energy to go to a Yankees game or to go to a wedding that I got to deal with. It's not an immediate one, hopefully, but with other, immediate family. But I just don't feel like greeting hello to people and kissing everybody hello and listening to the small talk and putting a smile on my face and faking it for 4 hours. I just don't have the emotional energy to do that. And that's okay. That's what you do. I'll do a little bit of it. I'll make an appearance, I'll say hello to everybody, and then I'm out of there. Same with the holidays and so on. Just so know your emotional limits and honor them. Respect your emotional limits. In number 6, you have the freedom to experience grief attacks and memory embraces. Of course, we talked about that, and they come out of nowhere. Anything can bring up that memory. And that memory you may even have forgotten. Something, well, he used to have a pair of sneakers like that. I can't believe it. That kind of thing, that brings it up. Or the hot dog place, that kind of thing, it just comes out of nowhere. You have the freedom to develop a support system. And this is important. The support system that you may have had together as a couple or as a family member, so it's your mom and dad or your children, may not be the same support system that you need now. Because they too can become inadvertently triggers of the grief, because they knew him too, or they knew her too, and they are not really helpful for you. And they might start trying to fix you, which is the kiss of death, when your friends start trying to fix you, or family members trying to fix you, or fix your life for you, is really bad news. So your support system may be strangers, people you didn't know before, or maybe people from the grief group, or people from the church who you never really hung out with those people before in the group, but you now know or heard that so-and-so had lost somebody, and when they came up to talk to you about it, you kind of bonded with what they were saying because that began to resonate with you. That person may become part of your new support system, or maybe that crowd. So to be very open on that changes. Again, the change of your self-identity. Number 8, you have the freedom to make use of ritual. And ritual is okay. There are lots of, sometimes, rituals you would not normally have had in your life. Some people keep a picture right next to the bed. You know, if you've ever heard, kiss the picture before you go into bed every night. Talk to the picture when they get in the room. Say goodbye to whoever it was, when they're leaving, came off to work now. That's okay as a ritual. They may have a place in the house. But now we had a real hard time when my daughter died. We had a really hard time. My wife's reaction was she took every picture we had out of the scrapbooks and had them framed and put all over the house. And that was killing me. It was really helping her get through it because she felt her presence everywhere. For me, I just felt pain everywhere. And we actually went to a therapist about it because I said, I got to move out of this house or you've got to let go of this shrine we're creating in the whole place. So I went to the therapy about it, and the therapist said, honoring both of us, that why don't you create one room or one space in a room where that's where you'll put up the pictures, and that's where you kind of honor her with this. And when you want to, you can go there. You can light a candle there. You can light an incense there, whatever you like, or put a flower there. Grow flowers in that place. And it actually was great, and we did that, and it was great for me too, because I could go there when I needed to, but I didn't have to go there when I just couldn't. And that worked out really well. So be creative and be free with yourselves on what rituals are for you. For one woman in the group, she said when she was cleaning out his drawer, the dresser, she found a button, one of his shirts had to come off. And she'd been meant to sewing on for months, that kind of thing. And now it's like a relic, it was really important to her, this button. And so she put the button, next to his picture on the thing there with a plant next to it, and it just became a piece of him. We do this with saints in our tradition. You have relics of saints, with people who died. We know this is part of ritual. It's okay to make your own ritual. And 9, you have the freedom to embrace your spirituality, and your spirituality may indeed change. It may be a very, as you read more how you relate, you may find that your male figure of a God becomes more female figure, or female becomes more male, whatever it is. It may be more that my spirituality is really about nature and being outside in the woods and by the water and canoeing than it is to be where there's an altar and a church and people that remind me maybe for the moment of a funeral. But the woods is where I connect with God, where I connect with my spirituality. And again, different people that might be, the people that that might be more, I'm drawn more to the quieter, contemplative people rather than to the people who are much more in the choir, if I was part of the choir. Well, I don't want to sing right now. I really want to be with those who just meditate, that kind of thing. Even within your own church, there are different pockets of the church that you might find more drawn to for your spirituality. In 10, we have the freedom to allow a search for meaning. We will always look for why, how, what does it mean, where does it go? That goes on forever and has the literature, tomes and tomes of literature about searching for meaning at this time. One of the things that helped me in terms of meaning, if I just may digress here for a moment, is that when I lost my child, losing a child is so intimate. It's like you just had an appendage removed, and you don't really know how you can go on. How can I go on with only one leg, But I reframed it at some point on my journey. My way of dealing with it was to reframe it that she was only going to live for 4 years. That's why she came to the planet. That was her life here. This is why God sent her here. I was just here to accompany her. She and her mother, her mother and I were here to give her birth, to get her here, to nurture her through that point until it was time for her to leave and go back to God. It wasn't mine. I was the chosen vehicle, part of the chosen vehicles for her journey, and then the gift to let her go back. And that was so healing for me to see it that way, that it wasn't mine. It wasn't that relationship, it was a relationship of this, and then back. And that really helped me reframe it. So that's just an example of how you might find a meaning, a different kind of meaning in your role. And even now, and then going back to the chaplaincy, being up on hospice, I've suddenly become shepherding people on a journey to death over and over again, and feeling quite comfortable with it, and even helping family members get through that. But I frame the whole thing, and there's a Hindu teacher named Ram Dass, and I'm very came across Ram Dass. He's very popular with some great books and things. And his take on life is, we're all here, we're all just walking each other back home. And I thought, wow, what a great way of looking at it. So we lost somebody, we were part of their journey, we were just walking them back home, and we too will be walked back home to wherever home leads us after this body. That helps to look at that kind of framing of things. So you have the freedom to treasure your memories, obviously, and to, again, to keep them where they're not in someone else's face that upsets them or whatever, but to put together your own journal. Journaling is great during grief. I keep memories before. One of the worries that come up with people, I'm going to forget her, I'm going to forget him, I'm going to forget what he looked like or what he sounded like or who he was. So there are ways of capturing that photographically as well as journaling. And then lastly, you have the freedom to move toward your grief and to heal. You don't have to do this forever. And literature is loaded, like, who's the, what's the book Mrs. Hammershaw was from, or is it Haverstraw, who always wore black. Remember that term? Haversham.
Great Expectations.
Great Expectations, right, exactly. The house burns down or something, I don't know, right, remember that? Yeah. She always wore black. And I remember in the old days, I was born in 1950, so say in the 50s into the 60s even, you'll say, oh, that's old, Widow Smith. She was defined by a widow and always wore black. She was always out on the porch, I remember, yelling at us if we kicked the ball onto her property. But, that's old Widow Smith, That was her identity. You don't have to stay with that identity. You may move on. You can heal from this and find other people, another husband, another wife, whatever is down that line for you, or another friend that you never had before. You can move towards a different group, a different way of seeing and heal. In many ways, in the spiritual journey, grief is essential. Grief is really what brings us from our kind of low, instinctive animal self to a much higher realm. So the passion of Jesus, a third of the Gospels is about the death of Jesus. The apostles don't ever actually get it until he dies. It's only in their grief do we have that walk to Emmaus. Do we have the upper room where he reappears, he comes back to them. And you'll have dreams as well. Sometimes the dreams are really interesting in this, the revisitations. This is when we begin then to see a much higher life. Buddha was a prince, right? And he, apparently according to legend, he escaped from the palace because his parents protected him so much as a prince. And that's when he first saw somebody who's dying, somebody who was limping and sick, somebody who was suffering, which threw him into grief and changed his whole path. So almost all the paths of the enlightened are journeys of grief. And certainly the Christian tradition is loaded with grief, right? The saints, the apostles, all of them are grief stories. And nobody quite gets it. Sir Francis of Assisi quite get it until they are really, until you've lost almost everything. Do you suddenly make that step over into a realm where this is part of life, what I can see, what was on, but this is not the full picture. The full picture is much grander than what we experience. And that's often when the enlightenment comes. So that's the journey of grief. And I'd like to invite now we're right at 3 o'clock, but we have some time. Anybody have any questions or reflections on anything I've said, or just where you are right now?